All right, Coach Tony here with another question and answer period. Remember, like this video and subscribe and hit that subscribe button below. So the first question that I got this week was, which is better for overall development, an elevated trap bar deadlift or an elevated snatch grip deadlift? The answer to this is it actually depends upon what the end goal is. If it's a sport-specific end goal or a task-specific end goal, I would lean towards the trap bar deadlift because you're going to keep more of an upright posture. The quads are going to end up a little bit, well, the quads and the knees are going to end up a little bit forward, so you're going to get more of that squatting type motion. You're going to be able to handle a higher load. You might even be able to move it faster. Now, if you're looking for strictly muscular development, hypertrophy, or task-specific for snatch and posterior chain development, then I would lean towards the snatch grip deadlift from an elevated position, like from the rack or from pulling blocks. So it really depends upon what the end goal is. Hypertrophy of the backside and strength of the backside, or snatch specific work, I would go with the snatch grip deadlift. If you're looking for athletic or task specific or maximal strength specific, I would lean more towards the trap bar deadlift. All right, so the second question that I got was, what are the top 3 supplement news things that I've learned in the last year? So the first one off the top of my head would be vitamin D3 is needed for magnesium absorption and use, and vice versa. Magnesium is needed for vitamin D3 absorption and use. Now let's first clarify what vitamin D is. It's not actually a vitamin. It is actually a hormone and a hormone precursor. It's used in the body for building our sex hormones like testosterone, estrogen, as well as many other hormones in the body to help keep you healthy, as well as many other things in the body all require vitamin D3. It's also part of our immune system and our immune response. The second piece that I've learned in the last year, or that I've learned more about, is how specific strains of probiotics, so the bacteria that lives within our gut, so our intestines, is actually linked to mental health. So if certain strains of bacteria within our gut starts to either have an overgrowth or be non-existent, we can have mental health issues that are related to that. There's some sort of axis that links our brain as well as our gut. So that's something that I've found interesting in the last year, is learning a little bit more about that and how different strains of probiotics can influence that and improve it, as well as improve cognitive or mental function. And the third big thing that I've kind of read more and more on is testosterone, and that for the most part, although people want to claim that it's a testosterone booster, it's mostly bullshit. Let's just leave it as the vast majority of the hype behind testosterone is misplaced, and it doesn't actually do the job that it's being hyped up to. But that's being used to make sales for it, which, yes, supplement sales are important for business. Do it the right way and not to just make a buck off of people. Another question I received was linked back to last week's video on why I said that doing full range of motion squats all year is not beneficial for a sprinter, and it will actually make them slower. Our bodies will respond specifically to an adaptation required. There's a principle called the SAID principle, S-A-I-D, for specific adaptation to impose demand. So what this means is if you require your body to become very strong in a specific range, such as in sprinting, you need to be very strong at the top range of a squat, then you're going to need to impose a specific stimulus to adapt to that demand. So if we're constantly doing a full range of motion squat, which is a slower squat than a top range or a quarter squat or even an eighth of a range of motion squat or a step up, it takes you longer to go through that. Not to mention the neurological demand that it requires, the trauma or damage that it does to the neuromuscular system, musculoskeletal system. So when you take that into account and you're getting close to competing, doing a full range of motion is going to cause more micro-trauma to the system. While it can be good for maximal strength and maximal hypertrophy, it's not necessarily going to be good for maximal velocity. Maximal velocity is when you take a look at the force velocity curve. So if velocity is on the y-axis and strength is on the x-axis, sprinting is the extreme of velocity versus strength, whereas maximal strength is the polar opposite of that extreme, where when you're getting stronger and stronger, you're actually moving slower. While yes, the intent behind the movement is important, there is still a significant amount of information that shows that the actual velocity of movement does still have a specific adaptive response within the body. So if you're trying to be moving fast at, like, say, the Olympic Games in 3 weeks, you're in a full range of motion squat, isn't necessarily going to be that specific work that's going to benefit you at the Olympic Games. So this is a bit of a cheeky question on what are my top 5 worst exercises to do. Number 1 is anything that causes pain or an injury. As blanket statement as that may seem, that's the fact. If somebody can't actually do a barbell bench press, having them do a barbell bench press isn't going to be good for them, so that's the worst exercise. But if they're okay doing a dumbbell bench press, or due to their current or past injury history, bench pressing isn't for them, then bench press would be the worst exercise for that person. So that's more of a specific and case-by-case situation. The second one would be max effort or max loading 1RM, 3RM, even 5RM hip thrusts, in my opinion, is just stupid to do. The reasoning behind this is that it places a substantial amount of shear force on the spine, on your lumbar spine. So that's that low part of the back. You know that feeling of low back pain? This isn't going to help with people who have low back pain. You're loading up several hundred pounds onto a barbell, a 1-inch thick piece of steel, putting it right across your pelvic area, where it's just, for the most part, bone, maybe some fatty tissue and some muscle there, and a little bit of thin muscle there, as well as potentially some artery and vein, depending upon the person's individual anatomical buildup. Makeup, not buildup. So you can actually cause a little bit of damage to the pelvic area with a very heavily loaded bar. Yes, you can wrap it with a foam padding and whatnot, but is the risk to reward ratio really there? The person who's been really hyping this up publishes research showing that the hip thrust is the be-all, end-all for glute development, strength, speed. He has a device that gives him a financial incentive to have biased research, and his whole nickname is the glute guy. Funny story, a couple of years ago, he blew up his own ass doing a hip thrust with maximal loading. So when you're doing an isolation type exercise, the hip thrust, which is isolation type, is not the best thing to be doing. So max loaded hip thrust, one of my worst exercises. Justin Kavanaugh, Coach Cav out of Washington, D.C. area, wrote an excellent article about it back in, I believe it was April 2018, further explaining why it's not a good exercise, especially for speed. Now, if you're looking just for hypertrophy, you want that booty, hip thrusts have their place for that. Higher rep, longer time under tension, moderate loading, loss of lactic directly into the glutes, that's where it has its place. The next worst exercise in my eyes is going to be anything where you're running or jumping on a Swiss ball or a Bosu ball. The reasoning for this is that an air-filled bladder that you apply force into, while you might be going up and down, the actual vector of the force, if this is the dome of a Bosu ball, for example, and you're running here, the force return actually comes at you from wherever the axis in the very center of that ball is. It comes perpendicular to that point. So it will come straight towards you. What this can cause is ACL and MCL and meniscus knee injuries. If your whole business model is you want to have nonstop rehab with people, sure, you're going to have a nonstop rehab because an ACL or an MCL tear is roughly 1 to 2 year recovery period. So in my eyes, running, jumping on air-filled bladders like the Bosu and the Swiss ball, dumbest things you can possibly do. Fourth worst exercise in my eyes is take a look at about 90% of what Dr. Seed Meme, aka Joel Seedman, does on his Instagram. And it's almost like he himself is trying to troll the entire industry because none of it really makes sense. Add on top his isometric, eccentric, 90-degree junk that he does that has no scientific basis, and it's just a recipe for disaster. Now, my final worst exercise to do is the current fad where even accounts and companies like SportsCenter are showing people doing stuff just for the sake of being famous on Instagram or on social media. Currently, there's a guy somewhere in the US who's taking an exercise bench. An adjustable bench, for example, weighs usually between 70 to 90 pounds, and he's doing chin-ups with this. How about you just take the weight belt, you take a couple of plates that weigh the same or more, and you do it, and you set a good example for other people, younger people going into the gym. Instead, you're setting an example of stupidity where somebody who's younger, somewhere, doesn't know better. They're going to go into a gym and think, this is what you do. Next thing you know, they're going to get hurt. Let's start setting a better example for those who are younger than us, instead of always seeming like we're trying to get on the next Jackass movie. The next question that I got was, what are some strategies or tips for improving the 6RM in the main lifts? So the main lifts are your bench presses, squats, deadlifts, overhead pressing, chin-ups. For some, it's going to also be dip, cleans, jerks, and snatch. The number one is increase the frequency that you're doing that specific lift that you're trying to improve on. If you're only doing it once a week, you need to do it maybe a second time. World-class weightlifters will squat, for example, snatch, clean, multiple times a week, even more so than just 7 times a week. They'll be practicing these exercises upwards of 12, 15, and at certain times of the year for short periods of time, 20 times in a week. They'll do 3, 4 sessions in a day. Another way is just increase the total volume or tonnage of that exercise. So if you're doing 4 sets of 8 or 5 sets of 5, add an extra set, or take that number of reps and increase by 1. So if you were only going to be doing 4 sets of 8, do 4 sets of 9 with the same weight, or push yourself and aim for being able to do sets of 10 with that same 8RM that you currently have, and the concurrent improvement will be in the 6RM range as well. Another thing you can do, increase the intensity, the relative intensity that you're working at. So if you're currently doing sets of 6, okay, let's work on maximal strength where we're doing sets of 5, sets of 4 for that exercise. Just get a little bit stronger on it, and then the 6RM, in theory, will also increase at the same time. So at the end of the day, it has to do with both increasing the volume, whether that's through frequency, intra-session, so that session increasing the volume in that session, or by increasing the intensity or the weight that you're lifting within that session on the bar. All right, the last question that I got is one that I actually really like. It's, what are some tips to somebody just starting out as a strength coach? The biggest tip I can give you, study, 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 and study some more. If you haven't gone to university and done formal education, if you're able to and you have the time and resources, do some formal education, just simply because it's going to give you a lot of the foundational knowledge in biomechanics, exercise science, exercise physiology, energy systems, musculoskeletal anatomy, anatomy and physiology, because those are the basic building blocks of that entire degree. If you're doing like a Bachelor of Science in Human Kinetics or Kinesiology, depending on the school that you go to, it will have a different name. When I say study, I, for example, since September of 2011, have studied for 2 hours a day minimum, every single day, without missing a day, and it's currently May 2nd, 2022. So that's nearly 11 years. So you can do the math on how much studying time that is. If you're not willing to put in the study time, then you don't actually want to become very good. The next thing, you might have to work for free for a little bit. You might have to volunteer. I did it One of the first Olympians that I ever worked with was basically all voluntary. Why? Person didn't have a budget. I was just starting out. Even if you're working with teams, you might have to volunteer time with that team because they might not have a budget. You need to prove yourself, especially when you're first starting out. I'm not saying work for free all the time, but there's times where you might have to put in that bitch work, basically, where you're doing work for free. Now, you're also going to need to experiment with clients, your general population clients, yourself, athletes, to find what works, how they respond to it. These are things that you learn in the actual groundwork. And the last piece of advice is find and see who the world's best are in, if it's a specific kind of domain or niche that you want, find the best of the best in it, read everything that they've ever written, buy their books, take their workshops, take their seminars, contact them for consultations. If you can't necessarily afford that, read everything they've written. I suggest reading people like Charles Poliquin, Christian Thibaudeau, Ian King. Like, these are some incredible people to be learning from. Dr. Yesis. The reason why is you're going to get a lot of foundational information, as well as it's going to feel like a fire hose is in your face if you just go to one of their seminars and you've never really gotten that background information and learned and read a crap load of what they've written. So this is what I would encourage you, if you're first starting out as a strength coach, to be doing. If you can also get some mentoring, if you can do internships, if you're in university and your school has a strength and conditioning program, there's some schools I wouldn't suggest. My old university, I wouldn't suggest doing an internship there. You're going to waste your time. But a lot of NCAA schools, I would highly suggest doing some interning there. One, you get hands-on experience. Even if you start out just cleaning the gym, you're still going to be seeing, you're still going to be absorbing through a little bit of osmosis. You can ask questions, you can talk, you can work out, you can ask the head strength coach, you can talk to the athletes. You can start to learn that way. Learning in the field is going to teach you more than any seminar will. You'll hear people say, take every workshop that you possibly can. I'm going to go against that and say, start with one seminar. Learn what you can from that, and then from that, apply it. You can't apply 10 seminars worth of stuff at the same time when you're first starting out, and even as you get better. You can only really take 2 or 3 within a year and truly implement and see what's better. So I'm going to thank everybody who's watched this video. Now, don't forget, hit that like button below, comment, and if you've got other questions, ask questions in the comment section below, and hit that subscribe button. Coach Tony, Risling, Podium Performance.